You need me to say something? You also need to say something. Pardon?
Never Christmas.
Yeah, I was already surprised to see how traditional a recipient becomes. Hmm?
Yeah.
Speak, say something.
Something.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is this enough? Good.
There's one more thing. I need to have this lifted up a little bit, so I'm not looking down. That's better. At least I don't have to go down here. Very high tech. Necco. That was a long time.
right, good evening, and thank you to everyone here in the room and online for joining us for tonight's Ahmad Tehrani Symposium. Particularly before a lecture on landscape, I want to share our land acknowledgement, which states that MIT acknowledges Indigenous people as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit tonight is the traditional and unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation and the Massachusetts people. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. For those of you who don't know, I'm Nicholas Demoncho, head of the department here, and tonight I give thanks once again to my predecessor, former department head Adair Tehrani, for his generous and continued support of the department through this annual lecture. I've been fortunate enough to know Adair since a fateful internship at an office adjacent to his in the summer of 1996, and as usual, I thank him for his wisdom and guidance across the years. I've also been fortunate enough to have had several conversations with Adair over the years about his remarkable father, Ahmad Tehrani, in whose memory he donated the funds for this annual event. Though it was not my privilege to know him in person, his most remarkable legacy as a diplomat and human being seems to have been to bring people together, as this lecture brings all of us together tonight. Such a spirit is, in fact, at the heart of the Tehrani Symposium as an idea, which connects communities across architectural and design practices, from engineering to graphic design, and tonight, of course, to landscape architecture, a most intimately connected discipline to our own, from which we are all too often estranged. That the most essential parts of the walls that divide practices of the doorways we walk through between them is a spirit that I believe honors Ahmad Tehrani as much as possible, as it provides also equally important professional guidance today. So after tonight, after a presentation from Martha Schwartz on her work and Martha Schwartz Partners, she will be joined by architect and landscape urbanist Dr. Markus Jatsch, who is a longtime collaborator.
very new, a very, very kind of, I think, once this actually would happen. But I think that that the idea of really being able to design with the ability to understand or know about art, I think is something that is really quite wonderful. And it makes things, you end up kind of making things that are different, or making things that people don't quite understand, which is fine. It can actually make others start thinking about different ways of designing, and actually starting others to kind of move forward. And that's what art is all about, actually. Okay, so let me start here. We'll start with MIT, and probably, I don't know whether you guys knew about the Necco Garden. Did you guys, any of you knew about the Necco Garden? Okay, well, there was a Necco Garden here at MIT that I and my sister decided to do. I'm not even sure that I asked anybody whether we could do it or not. We just did it. Now, why we chose Neccos is that there was a Necco foundry, or they were making Neccos across the street from here, and you could smell it. And I thought, well, you know, we don't have a lot of money, it'll be cheap, but they gave us a lot of Neccos that we actually worked with. And there are the Neccos, and different colors. And when I was still at Harvard, I decided to create the front yard using Necco wafers because I liked it as a kid. And again, they were being produced across the street. So they gave us a lot of Neccos so we could put the wafers on the ground. And we also decided not only to have the Neccos, I mean, the Neccos were put on these to actually make the different lines that created where we were going to actually put the big Neccos, which we got from tires that were broken and stuff like that. So we went ahead and we made the tires the same as the Neccos. Of course, you can't really eat them very much. But the students started to come outside. They were wondering what was going on. It was just something that had not been told about, or yet it was still right in front of MIT. And people came in, they were playing with all sorts of balls, and you know, they really had a very good time on this, but they still didn't quite know what this was about, which I think is absolutely fine, is to actually let people think about what it might be, or could have been, or something else. So it was up to them to figure out what that was about. And this one was very interesting, and then this was a paper that came out of MIT about the Necco Garden, where many of the students offered their view on the Necco Garden. And most had no idea what it was meant to be, and the art came up as somewhat fun, but very confusing. Many of the students had no use for the Neccos, while others coming up with really funny reasons for the Neccos. And many also recognized it as art. A few people thought, well, maybe this is an art thing. And some saying that art was just a waste of effort and money. But this is exactly what art is good for, is to make people think about meaning and how things can change. And the reality for them was for them to think about what it could have meant to them. So here is the beginning of the lecture I'm going to give. And this was a competition that MSP worked on for the world's largest airport. This was in something like 2018. And we would deal with over 1 million people a year in this airport. We competed with the likes of architects such as Foster, Zaha, Fuchs, Calatrava, Big, SOM, HOK, and a few others. Those were all the people we were actually fighting against. And so we were the only landscape architects. So what? Okay, so now, this was called the first carbon negative airport, and the integration of natural systems, technology, and art within the landscape. Now, to begin, we use natural and technological processes to achieve carbon negativity to include the takeoff of flight and landing of aircraft. Understanding that air travel is a carbon-intensive thing, we needed to draw down 1,000 gigatons from the atmosphere. Our agenda was to create the first carbon-negative airport in the world and created an example for how this could be done in other airports. And the running of this terminal would have 100 million visitors a year and would be sustained by on-site systems. One thing I want to let you know is that when I was teaching at Harvard, I was also teaching geoengineering. And the geoengineers, they were about 4 or 5 minutes away from the GSD. And because I had started to understand about climate change and read about climate change, it was very, very interesting to me, and I actually created a class, for a seminar for geoengineering. And these guys would come in and teach the students, and the students came from all sorts of places within within Harvard. And it was very, very interesting. And I still actually am very interested in it because I still believe that solar geoengineering is what's going to actually save us in climate change. And we could actually talk about that a little bit later, but that's what I think is going to happen. Now, the project is based on climate change, mitigation, and geoengineering. The circle is the area where the airport is. And the colored strips on the ground are created by enhanced weathering rock. That was something that I learned about in geoengineering. And the rocks are pulverized into sand and absorb carbon dioxide, which colors these rocks are green and orange. And this is what people will see as they land and take off in the airplanes. I wanted, when they were coming over to the airport, that they started to see these waves of different colors in the sand. So mitigation, which is about absorbing carbon dioxide, and self-sufficiency were at the top of our to-do list. The entire airport complex is designed to be self-sustaining, using as little materials such as energy, water, food waste, decarbonization, all which must interact with each other, which is a virtual cycle which will run and maintain the airport. So the area of the airport has been identified as a global hotspot, as temperatures are expected there to rise to real big extremes actually during summer, leaving winter months with higher than usual heat, creating dry soils and a lack of food. This area's greatest impacts is extreme heat, which is a threat to human health and welfare across the region. By the way, extreme heat is going to be probably one of the biggest impacts of climate change to us as well. Predictions project nearly 50 degrees Celsius, with heat-related mortality projected to increase 20 times in this century under current climate scenarios. And these conditions are expected to worsen throughout the 21st century if fossil fuel emissions are not reduced drastically. And it's true that today, even if we were to stop emissions, the Earth is going to continue to heat up. Droughts and water scarcity will continue to increase with severity, affecting the agricultural ability of populations to produce food and putting strain on otherwise already extremely limited water resources. And it's also true that food is going to be a real issue in the future for us. So these are methods we used in the design of the buildings and the landscape. And we used enhanced weathering, which are pulverized rocks combined with water and takes down carbon dioxide, and ground-based albedo modification, which is a technique of reflecting incoming sunlight back into the space. And we also used biochar, which is a form of charcoal made from animal waste and plant residues, such as wood chips, leaves, and husks, that undergo pyrolysis that acts like a carbon sponge. And while I'm saying this, it's like, these are all things that we learned as landscape architects, and we can still use them. So we inserted direct air capture machines, which take down atmospheric carbon dioxide and can either sequester it in the ground or create a carbon fuel for a long-distance shipping or air travel. So I don't know whether you've heard about, whoops, sorry. Let me just keep on going on this. But we can actually sequester these things in the ground, and that's very important for us to do that. And the airplanes were using a low carbon fuel, and that was actually done by taking down carbon and then putting it into a machine, and then that carbon became a fuel, but it did not actually come out as emissions at all. So the airplanes were using a low carbon fuel, and it would be a negative emissions at airport. That would be a certainty to our future. And along with direct air capture is solar thermal power plant, a large-scale solar PV and biological water treatment plants. So our stance was that we are not architects. We are not interested in designing a building. What we did was to bury the building, so to diminish the need for energy by cooling the terminal. And this would also better integrate the building with the landscape in a way that there would be no real differentiation between the landscape and the building. There would be a fluid visual and sculptural integration of all the technical elements, and we looked at landscapes that were diametrically opposed, nature and man-made. The underlying design logic for the first carbon-negative airport through use of the landscape flows from understanding the site character and opportunities and its unique geological, cultural, and environmental context. The formal design direction is derived from several key conditions observed in the existing landscape. which determined the form, materials, textures, colors, and overall sensation chosen for the new airport landscape design. Circular crop irrigation circles imposed upon the fluid form of the desert imposed a strong geometric man-made pattern in the desert and from the air. And the beauty of both the natural and man-made landscapes inspired the motif to express that humankind can live in harmony with nature. The visual language of all elements of the airport are to be connected through the dominance of the characters of the landscape itself. It would be a hybrid of agriculture and advanced technology with highly operative natural processes, achieving a sense of grace, respect for the environment, using the native identity of that place. So this shows a first sketch trying to understand the forms of the sand so that our drawing and sculpting of the land was seen as a part of the natural landscape. Authentic desert beauty of plant life inspired a predominantly xeric planting concept. Aerial experience of the airport viewed upon landing, as well as satellite viewpoints from outer space, required a large-scale visual proposal that will engage with these phenomena. And there are a number of colors of sand that come from different geological times and materials. And the reddish sand is iron-rich, sweet sand, veins that give rise to patterns and shapes that influence the landscape, ground, plane, and patterns. And this was the language that we used as the springboard for our design. Authentic desert beauty of plant life inspired a predominantly xeric planting concept based upon the use of native plants. An aerial experience of the airport viewed upon landing, as well as satellites' viewpoints from outer space, required a large-scale visual proposal that will engage with these phenomena. So, does anybody know who Christo is? Yes? Okay. I have to say that the reason that I ended up in landscape architecture is that when I was at school, University of Michigan, at art school, I loved land art because in the 70s, beginning of the 70s and the 80s, that's when land art started. And I loved that so much. I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. But what happened is that I didn't know exactly how I was going to do that because, first of all, in art, females in art is really tough. And I don't want to go into that, but it isn't a good place for women in terms of the art. But I actually wanted to, a friend of mine told me, well, why don't you go into landscape architecture? And I'm like, well, I don't even know what that is because my family were all architects, all of them. And I had no idea what landscape architecture was. And, but I decided to do it because I thought, well, if I go into landscape architecture, I'll be able to get my hands on a lot of places, a lot of places that I would be able actually to work with the land. And I thought, well, that's going to be what I'm going to do. And I'll just tell you one story, which is kind of funny. But when I went there, like the first week, and I asked the guy who was in charge of the whole thing, and I asked him whether I could take an art class on land art, but there wasn't any land art because it was too young. And what he says, oh no, he says, a good landscape is a landscape that does not show the hand of man. And I'm like, this isn't going to work for me. It was like, really? But yeah, anyway, so I forgot, I didn't care what he said. But anyway, so it was really very interesting. And this guy, Christo, he created what was called the running fence. And it was done in California in 1976. So I follow these land artists. Now, he came into my mind immediately, and hence we used colored strands of sand that run across the landscape, describing the natural flows of the desert. And our concept design began with this circle, which defined the area of the airport. So at the beginning of this, we actually also did the airport. And this was a quick model of our airport. And you can see how the top of the airport slants down to the desert, and the colored marbles are glass biodomes. And we designed the giant roof garden, which was slanted so people could access the desert from the roof garden. And there were outdoor activities, gardens, restaurants, and access to horse riding in the desert. The glass biodomes inserted into the terminal are the homes of different natural biomes from all over the world, including a snow garden that can be accessed within the airport. And this would be placed for the travelers to learn and eat at the same time. So this is a view across the solar thermal installation that we had to the terminal. And we used a large-scale solar field to the amount of sun given to the fact that there was a lot of sun in that area. And what you see beyond the solar field is the airport's roof, which is a garden that people can access while waiting to get on board. The glass dome is one of the many domes that people can enter to enjoy. So, and here are a couple of interiors of the domes. In the next step in the competition that we had, we were married to an architect who had a similar design that worked well with our concept and the landscape. The entire building was underground. This image is a refined flyover here with more of the infrastructure placed. And the shiny circles outside the rings are solar plants. And other, if you see that, kind of more on the bottom, and other circles are the direct air capture plants. Again, these are all geoengineering things and different kinds of machines. So the shiny circles outside the ring are solar plants, and water treatment plants, seawater greenhouses, crop circles, and other auxiliary program. And this illustrated master plan shows the terminal and the service buildings in white. The giant 8-kilometer width land art ring, the ring around it, marks the airport from outer space. We wanted to do something that could be seen from outer space and define the airport area. The flowing colored strands go far beyond the airport as a carpet so people can follow the colored strands as they start to land and take off. And within the ring park, green areas run adjacent to the ring, providing park areas for relaxation and recreation. And underneath the ring is a public transport train that can take all the visitors from the adjacent city and parking nodes to a number of parks, cultural facilities, and science labs linked to the circular park. And the ring is put to work as it stores pressurized air. So the airport has a steady supply of renewable energy in the night. So, constrained by walls, the colored strands of weathered olivine and basalt rock are nurseries that provide carbon dioxide to the soils. And these nurseries are the beginning of regenerating the desert. Another image of these nurseries illustrates how the walls work in conjunction with greening. And these walls will interrupt the airflow enough to allow seeds that are carried in the wind to drop down on the ground, which will be lightly irrigated. So desert strands are being regreened. Other areas are decarbonizing, and others serve as parks and pathways that connect the parks to each other and to the terminals. And they are all designed for walking, skating, biking, skateboarding, etc. And there are pathways for motorized desert sports vehicles. And there will be a two system of transport available on calls, automated vehicles or the tram. So, as you're about to land, the planes fly over the direct air capture machines. Does anybody know about direct air capture? Yep. Okay. You guys do. Okay. So, the direct air capture machines that are set in the middle of the swirls of fencing and which protect the facilities from the sand and the birds and the humans. And this also protects views into this area because they are not so great to look at, but the fences create a very dynamic view of the landscape as one lands or takes off. So now the fun starts. Technology and virtuous cycles. So the effect of this landscape offers the basis for the world's first negative emissions airport. And this is a precedent-setting project that demonstrates to the world how landscape architects can meaningfully address global implications of climate change. Our design for the airport landscape goes beyond energy self-sufficiency, proposing instead 5 virtuous cycles. These include circular economies in and of themselves, along with cycles of energy, water, waste, food, and carbon dioxide, which are intended to be as functionally integrated with the airport and its supporting facilities as the landscape is visually. The virtuous cycle refers to a chain of positive events which reinforces itself. A positive result happens from an event that leads to another positive result, strengthening the circumstances as a whole. This is a diagram of the energy cycle showing the pathway from solar energy that will run the various components of the airport, the direct air capture machines, the airport and the greenhouses, and the biodomes and the electric shuttles. This is the water cycle. The water came from the city, which was treated by our water treatment plant, and the city's sewer plants and underground water that traveled within the desert but was not potable, and wadis, which are streams that flow during the flood season. The water was cleaned by biological water treatment plants and used for irrigation to green the desert. We took down carbon dioxide through enhanced weathering and storing it in olivine rock. Enhanced weathering is the process by which rocks, soils, and minerals break down at or near the Earth's surface, and it can be caused by physical, chemical, and biological interactions with water, air, and water's living organisms, and absorbs carbon dioxide onto the land. This is water for the airport. And airport water demand was done through using underground water, wadis, and the water helped to green the desert and took down carbon dioxide through enhanced weathering rocks and absorbed water in the rocks, which is stored in it in the olivine rock. And the water treatment waters the indoor farms and the airport. Carbon dioxide was absorbed by olivine rock and biochar, which is a charcoal-like substance made by burning organic material in low oxygen environment. It's a stable carbon-rich solid that can be used as a soil amendment to improve crop yields and soil biodiversity. Again, this is something that landscape architects can do. And biochar also helps to mitigate climate change and pollution. Direct air capture is a technology that actively removes carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere by using chemical reactions to trap it, allowing the captured carbon dioxide to be permanently stored underground or utilized in various products, essentially acting like a sponge for atmospheric carbon. Low carbon fuel technology is being developed by David Keith. Have any of you guys heard about David Keith? He was in the New York Times. He was the one who I worked with at Harvard. He was there. He was in charge of the geoengineering group. Now he's in Chicago, yes, because they're giving him a lot more money than Harvard did. You go, David, okay. So David Keith is known for developing low carbon fuel technology called air-to-fuels, which involves capturing carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere through a process called direct air capture, and then converting it into liquid fuels like gasoline or diesel, essentially creating a carbon neutral fuel source by using existing infrastructure while removing carbon dioxide from the air. So we use solar energy to run the direct air capture machines and the airport and all the other parts of the airport. So greening the desert. We dealt with water evapotranspiration. We increased humidity. We created better habitat for plants. This is greening the desert. The rate of greening, it cools the environment, grows more plants, and creates better soils, thus the ability to grow crops. So this was a big deal for how we could actually start to create this, the greening of the desert. So we greened the desert through drip irrigation, biochar, and enhanced weathering, which absorbs carbon dioxide, which plants love, and other ways of creating soil that could grow plants. So, the system of the world's largest airport has birthed the first carbon negative airport. And this system establishes a closed-loop system, establishing a new standard for sustainability and self-sufficiency. Our ambitions for this new airport landscape have birthed an iconic design that sits at the intersection of science and land art. The end. So, that's our lecture. I'm sure it's kind of a strange lecture, but I think it makes the case that we are landscape architects, but there are many things that we can do as landscape architects. We are able to work with all sorts of wonderful things that you guys are making here in terms of, having all sorts of new technologies, which we used and still use, and also making sure that we're doing something that when people look at them, they're going to wonder, what is that? And that's exactly what you know. That's what you need. That's what we need. That's what I need, is that if I'm going to be designing something, I want to do something where, what is that? We're very smart monkeys. That's what we are, And the thing is that if you pick up something like, what is that? Immediately, we want to find out what that is. And it attracts you. If you do the same thing over and over again, what everybody else does, that's not a lot of fun. It's really about how we respond to what we're looking at. And that's why art actually is so important. And I think that all of these things can come together. So that's it. So what should we do now?
Well, I think it'd be great, Markus, if you could join Martha on stage and we could ask a couple questions.
Oh, some questions. Okay, that's going to be scary. Oh, thanks. Where is my... Yeah, where's my bag? No, not this one.
Oh, your backpack.
No, backpack. What happened to my backpack?
Here.
Ah, okay. I may need some help here. So.
Okay.
I can start with a question.
Oh, good. Yeah.
When the three of us spoke about this lecture, we spoke about the kind of preconceptions that architects and landscape architects have of each other and their own professions, which involves preconceptions about everything like what we look at and what we're inspired by, to the technical matters that we understand and convey about each other's, the assumptions we make about each other's disciplines, and then the areas, of course, where we end up increasingly overlapping in terms of those expertise, our expertise in defining those preconceptions. This project is a great example, but maybe you could both talk a little bit more about your own working relationship and how these kinds of cultures of the professions both intersect and are also deconstructed a little bit in a much wider context than the one project.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point you're asking.
The landscape architect, and what is the stereotype that a landscape architect has of an architect? Maybe that's a much simpler question.
I'm struggling with this question a lot because I came from exactly what you just described. When I heard during my architectural training about the requirement to do a landscape seminar, I was completely pissed. I wasn't interested in planting and trees and all of that. And it was a horrible seminar to start with. And it was only after I met Martha and I better understood with her, through her background, a very different angle towards what landscape actually is about, that I understood the potential. And I vividly remember a crucial statement back then, which was that landscape is everything outside a building, everything. It's not just the park or the flower bed or the river waterfront. You know, it's where the dog shits, it's where the garbage lies, it's the street, the highway, all of that is landscape. And because all of that is landscape, it's also a design opportunity. We decide how all these things look like. Every square inch outside of a building. And that was really, for me, an important thing to realize as an architect, to understand landscape is not just the area designated by the planning department or by zoning codes as green space.
Well, yeah, my point of view isn't a very good one, but still, the architects see that they are on top and that we go and plant some flowers at the bottom of the building. And some of them actually will come and tell you exactly what to do, which is like, well, why am I here? I don't want to do that. And that has happened, I can tell you. For some reason, it's seen as, somebody who is lower than thou, that you're just down at the bottom of stuff. And that's still there. It's still there. Now, what's happening now is because of climate change, a lot of the architects have their own little landscape architecture group within them, which is okay, but it's the architects who's telling them what to do and what not to do and what they like. I mean, I feel sorry for them, but probably they're making money. But you know, this hasn't actually helped. It's still like that. It's still like that. And it's still almost like that being a female. A bit, not as much as it was, but even that is still something that is like, well, you know, that's actually why we didn't win this, this thing, is that, I mean, this crown prince wanted it, he wanted it, but it was like, no, blah, 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 we can't do that. It's, you know, not a female, but it's tough for landscape architects to have to deal with that. That doesn't say that all the architects are horrible, you know, not, but they feel that they are somehow above you as landscape architects. Now, what is changing, which is interesting, is that when you start really understanding what's happening in climate change, landscape architects are the #1 profession within the built environment that deals with climate change. So, in that sense, we're very important.
The buildings are the ones still pouring all the carbon into the system, but...
Well, they still feel like they're doing their thing, yeah. They're still putting carbon into their system, but yeah, there's, I don't really know why. I mean, it is somehow, the buildings are way beyond, but maybe it's because people are living in them, and you know there's a bathrooms, and you go and you eat. I mean, you know, it's a place for us to actually live in, which we have to. And we don't have to actually live within the land, or, you know, I mean, it's like kind of having a nice hat or making something very pretty or this, that, and the other. So it's still like that. But we try to, we work a little bit differently. You know, there are things that we know about and use, and I think I think that the technologies are really very interesting now. It was very interesting. I mean, there was what was it, last year when I went to Dubai for that GTEx thing? Was that last year, something like that? A great big group of people, huge, where people come from all over the place, and it was on Dubai, and all they wanted, you know, what their thing was about their money and how they're going to make money, and kind of, and then how they want to really talk about new kinds of different kinds of I mean, about IT and all this kind of stuff that they were looking at. You know, they really wanted to have a lot of things like that. And when I got there, and I was supposed to lecture about this, about the money and the technology that they were looking for, and I'm like, wait a minute. You won't be living here in the next 10 years. I mean, with all the, you know, with climate change, the water is going to go up. It's going to be way too hot. It's not going to be livable. You don't have any food. You don't have any water. I mean, it's like, what are they thinking about? They're not even thinking about these things. They're thinking about money. And I actually told them, that they were going to have to really, if they really looked into what they would be able to do with technology to actually be able to protect themselves, that in itself would create money. At the same time, being able to kind of make it livable. I mean, it was that, but that's what I'm saying, is that there are different ways of really thinking about what your landscape is going to be like, and then actually, I know when we're working, we're always looking at whomever it is that is our person we're working at, is that, are you going to be building this and are you going to then sell it, or is this something that you really want over time? Because if they're just going to sell it, they're not going to want to pay for what they're going to need to actually keep it okay, given the impacts of climate change. And so we always really kind of start with that idea that, okay, well, they want this house, they want it forever, they're going to really want it, but if it turns out that, there's going to be a lot of water coming down to this house and it's going to get, then you have to really think how you're going to redo, how the earth is actually, you have to really kind of make sure that that's going to be something that you'll be able to not put all that water there. We're going to need to actually have some space for being able to have some food and so forth and so on. I mean, it really is about putting that together way before you start to somewhat design, is to really kind of figure out how to shape the earth so that whatever, maybe the water should be coming in or shouldn't be coming out, maybe there are going to be places where it's going to be too hot and you need to do this, that, and the other. So you start really thinking about that first. But it doesn't mean that you give up actually doing something that's interesting, and I think that that's important, is to come up with something that is of interest or keeps you interested.
Well, it occurs to me that with Miho in the room, we've doubled or tripled the expertise and wisdom on landscape and building and how they interact that's normally here in the school. So I do want to open up. I think we should take one or two questions from our audience before we let you all get back to everything else you have going on in this week before finance. But please go ahead.
Thank you so much for your lecture. It's so interesting, and of course also your proposal.
I'm going to bring you the mic, so
so my question is, in terms of going to the second stage of the competition, and especially having to join forces with another office, as you said, how was the negotiation process in terms of what were the things for your proposal, and especially for the integrity of your proposal, that were non-negotiable? When it came to actually maybe like shifting in some aspects of it and creating something that is of communal choice of both with both offices, and what were the things that you're like, okay, maybe this could potentially go as like a second choice? So yes, that's it.
I'm not sure I followed everything that you said. I didn't quite,
Sorry. No, my question is, when it came to the second stage of the competition proposal,
Yeah.
you said that you had to join forces with another office.
Yeah, exactly, yes.
And yes, so my question is, when it came for you to
Yeah, okay, I got it,
reconfigure,
yeah.
yes.
I didn't like it.
Yeah, I can imagine. So this is why I'm asking, because
Yeah.
in terms of especially coming with a proposal in the first stage, you have created a whole vision of what that's supposed to be. So going to the second stage and having to do that compromise, how
Yeah.
that came about, and what were the things that were non-negotiable for your proposal and for the integrity of your proposal?
Well, we had to let the architect do what he wanted to do.
Mm.
I didn't think it was nearly as good as what we had done, that's for sure. But it was for us, there was so much land about it. There was this giant circle, and there was going to be a park in there, and this, that, and the other. So there was a lot that we actually could have fun with. So, and also, it was so interesting using these geoengineering ideas, because very few people know anything about that. But it really was very, very interesting. So we didn't want to let go of that.
I think the item we held on and tried to hold on the most was the aspiration and the vision for the project to be the first carbon neutral and self-sufficient airport. And that was possible because it was the largest airport site in the world. So the landscape was a huge area which could be utilized and could become productive and could become part of the infrastructure. The terminal building in itself was a pretty insignificant element. And for us, that aspiration to utilize the landscape to achieve these goals was something we were able to carry over also into this new scheme, luckily.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I have a question. How many of you are architects or going to be architects? 1, 2.
Studying architecture is a good question. Our students never could. We have an interesting program in that more than half of our students go on to be registered architects, but many of them go on to be entrepreneurs in the space of architecture, to run labs in architecture firms, to operate in and around and extending the discipline, which is part of why conversations like this one end up being so important, because I think as a department and as a school, we appreciate the fact these days we're involved both at the center of the discipline, but also more often even in extending it. And I think this interaction you've showed us this evening especially between architecture, technology, and landscape as a necessary and integrated system for addressing large-scale challenges is a really important thing for everyone to see.
Yeah.
I have a question for you before we have to leave. How do you communicate to future students of the program why architecture would be a good choice?
Why architecture would be a good choice?
Yes.
I mean, that's a question for them more than for. I can only tell you how we try to do it. I can't tell you how we
I'm
actually
curious.
manage
I'm
to
really
do it.
curious. Because it can't be about making buildings
Yeah.
or designing buildings, I would assume, I would hope. But what is it then?
I mean, I think we occupy many different spaces of privilege here at MIT, and I would talk about it in at least two ways. One, we're the oldest professional program of architecture in North America, so we have a very distinctive position in the history of the profession. There was no professional architectural education at all, other than as a kind of trade or apprenticeship before we're here. So we have a responsibility to that tradition, and we keep at the core, we call it even the core of our program, a kind of training in how buildings go together and how the parts are made. And yet, in the one of the world's most astonishing research environments, we also have a kind of soup that core is immersed in, that students move out into, that is questioning everything about it, in terms of both engineering, in terms of its history, in terms of the role of creativity. And then we have a really important core around that of many of the students you see are in our research degrees, research masters or PhDs that also surround the professional program that look at specific fields like computation, history and theory of architecture, urbanism, building technology, and really act as the kind of more literal cell wall between that core of architectural education and really the larger wealth of MIT. And as you saw when you walked through, it's very hard at MIT to tell where we are and where everything else is, which, you know, to some extent is disorienting, but to some extent is really important because it allows us to ingest and create knowledge in important ways around the core of the profession. But the core, I guess why it's really important, you know, as we begin to wrap up, I'll say I think why it's particularly important to have landscape here. This is one of the enormous blind spots of this institution historically, because of both the small scale, the preconceptions about landscape, and then the kind of histories of the disciplines. There is an enormously equivalently rich tradition of landscape and its interaction with research and new things, from, you know, the birth of GIS to many other kind of innovations in the world that came from similar kind of tensions between practice and technology and research, and almost none of that happened here, and we're kind of deprived of that history and its cross-fertilization, and it's particularly important now. So I think, you know, one of the things we have to think about it, maybe, you know, better over drinks than over the lecture, is how at this particularly crucial moment in history we address that blind spot in this institution more than just by waving our hands around, because I think the idea that a building is an object on a cafeteria tray of space is, if it was ever appropriate, is not appropriate now. A building is part of a larger ecology. Its roots go down into the ground infrastructurally. Its outputs go out into the atmosphere. We can't think of it as separate, so we can't really teach it as separate, but then we need to think about how to shape our pedagogy in order to do that. Do you have any thoughts? Maybe that's a good thing to close with.
No, I think that's, I hear that, and I think it's a good idea. I really do. But I do a lot of lecturing, specifically about the importance of the urban landscape. Yeah. I've done a lot of that, and in order to deal with what we're dealing with now, we need, I mean, what I need is, you know, somebody who is a planner. We need to have more open space in our cities, absolutely, so that we can actually plant the plants and deal with a lot of the impacts that we're getting, like, you know, flooding and heat, and you know, dealing with the you know, bad stuff in the air itself, and, you know, trying to get water, clean water. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we need to get done, but again, because of landscape architecture, it's like, well, who cares about it? But actually, you know, I've been trying to get people, I tried this at Harvard. They didn't listen to me at all, of course, but why don't we put our buildings up so we have more open space where is going to be needed to be able to plant all different kinds of things and different kinds of plants. We're going to have to have a lot of trees coming into the city like crazy. I had done something. It was a class I was telling about you know, having a way of trying to, you know, deal with Boston, what's going to happen with Boston? And from that one, it's still true. Like, what are we going to do for here? What are we going to do for Boston? And what are we going to, what are the things that we really need to be working on? And most of it is going to be the landscape, not the buildings. And I think that that's really important. I think it's really important that we start to be able to figure out how we're going to afforest a city. And actually, I got a grant from, it was a Harvard Climate Change Solutions grant a few years ago now. And I worked on that based on what I had been doing, teaching that. And it's the idea of, well, if we actually are going to be getting automated vehicles, we would be able to have 30 to 50% of the spaces in our roads. And we could actually plant trees in that road. And the roads would go throughout the city. So we would have a big enough forest that would deal with the heat and flooding, and would be able to have clean air and clean water. I mean, I don't call it linear urban forest, and I'm still working on this thing.
The example shows, and also the airport project, that in order to address climate change, any climate solution is a scale issue. You can't tackle climate change on a small scale, which is what architecture in the end is about. But that's where planning also becomes so important, because planning, like landscape architecture, is about large scale topics, strategies, solutions. And to me, that's very fascinating, because you need to embrace the planning approach as something which isn't just about the allocation of transportation systems and buildings. It's about utilizing that open space outside of buildings as infrastructure. All of it is infrastructure and needs to perform accordingly. Yeah. And the romantic notion of what landscape architecture is as something which is green and people enjoy and you have flowers and birds, that needs to be scrapped and revisited. But it's a long way to go. Most developers, most clients don't come to us with that expectation. They come to us, they want greenery. It's pretty clear. Maybe they want something iconic at the entrance of the shopping mall. Yeah. But they don't understand even what the problem is.
Well, the streets have to be taken out. We need to, I mean, there are so many things that have to be done in order to deal with climate change as it is going now. Yeah.
But my point is our landscape architects, we often define, most of the times, we tell the client what the issues are. The clients have no clue. As an architect, when a client comes to you, they have a pretty good understanding what they need. They know how many office spaces they need, they know how much square foot they need, they have an idea about the program they need. A landscape architecture client usually doesn't know what they need. They don't even understand the problem. And that is our responsibility to actually, through the research at the beginning of a project, to educate them. These are the issues you will be facing in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time. And these are possible solutions.
So those of you who are becoming architects, if you've learned one thing tonight, respect your landscape architecture collaborators and listen to them. I want to give a couple of real appreciations. I want to thank Markus and Martha for coming at the challenging end of a challenging year. I want to thank all of you tonight for coming at the challenging end of the challenging semester. We make the space of this department together, and you were just as important part of tonight. And I want to thank Miho for a really lovely introduction, and I want to thank Joel for all of his help tonight and throughout the lecture series for making these very important spaces happen. So everyone, give each other a round of applause.
Thank you.
Oh, and Yolande and the lecture committee, of course, as well. So, so thanks to our lecture committee especially for putting together an amazing series of lectures this semester, which is the last one. And stay tuned for next semester's series, which we'll be announcing almost instantaneously, right? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Good luck with everything.